Morning and welcome to West Valley Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Valerie Lynch and I'm serving as your worship associate this morning. We welcome to, as we continue to offer our services on Zoom at these pandemic times. We're so glad you joined us this morning. Everyone is welcome here, regardless of your education level, financial status, gender identity, sexual orientation, political leanings, immigration status. Whatever divides people in our society today, it does not divide us here. So we're so glad you joined us this morning. Your presence is a gift. I don't know if there's any announcements today. I don't think so. So we will open the service. I have opening words. This is from President Barack Obama. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. We begin our service today with the lighting of the chalice, and Jim Ray will read a chalice lighting this morning.
James Mercer Langston Hughes, 1901 to 1967, was an African-American poet, social activist, novelist, playwright, and columnist. He wrote this poem, I Dream a World. I dream a world where man no other man will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. I dream a world where all will know sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul, nor avarice blights our day. A world I dream where black or white, whatever race you be, will share the bounties of the earth and every man is free, where wretchedness will hang its head and joy like a pearl attends the needs of all mankind. Of such I dream my world.
Thank you, Jim. Let us now read together the words of our covenant. Love is the doctrine of our congregation. The quest for truth is our holy right, and service is our prayer. Dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humankind in friendship. Thus do we covenant. Okay, each week in our church when we're together, we take up an offering. We're not meeting in person these days, but it's still important to take care of our church community. And we continue the spiritual practice of offering financial contributions. Please take a few minutes now to prepare a check to mail in or to donate via our link on the website. Okay, this morning, our sermon will be a little different than usual. Earlier this summer, Jim Reay and I learned we were both involved in book study groups that were reading the same book, How to Be an Antiracist by Ibram X. Kendi. Both groups met on Zoom. My group was mostly New Yorkers. Jim's group was basically based in the Phoenix area. So Jim and I will both be offering reflections this morning on racism, a really big topic. And we hope this will lead to learning more and doing action for ourselves, our congregation, and beyond. We thought we would share some of what we learned over the course of reading this book and reflecting on our lives as white Americans. I invite Jim Reay to begin.
Thank you. How to Be an Anti-Racist. In 1963, I was 14 years old when Martin Luther King conducted his Freedom March on Washington. Watching the evening television news with my parents, I recall my dad saying, "Everywhere that guy goes, he causes trouble." I was not in a position to voice disagreement with my father, but I knew in my heart that his utterance sounded hollow and untrue. My dad did not consider himself a racist, but his views and statements about people of color were racist ideas and racist declarations. Growing up in a segregated suburb of Minneapolis, I neither met nor spoke to a Black person until Uncle Sam drafted me for the Vietnam War. In basic training at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, my bunkmate was Black. My Army platoon was saturated with Black soldiers. It didn't occur to me until years later that there was a high number of conscripted Black men because the US government was racist in its enforcement of the Vietnam draft process. I never considered myself racist. I've always enjoyed getting to know people from different backgrounds. Perhaps that's why I've loved traveling internationally. How could I be racist? Enrico, the first boyfriend I lived with, was Black. We rented a downstairs duplex in a nice integrated middle-class Minneapolis neighborhood. Our home just happened to be only 6 blocks from where George Floyd was killed by Minneapolis police 3 months ago. In his New York Times bestseller, How to Be an Anti-Racist, author Ibram X. Kendi outlines through personal experience and scholarly expertise how racism has always been a part of American history. My book club has been discussing via Zoom this important text, and my eyes have been opened to the importance of realizing and admitting to the extreme racial injustice in America. It is not enough to not be a racist. It is necessary to overtly be anti-racist by speaking up when racist comments are made. It is essential to act when racial injustice occurs. In the book, Ibram X. Kendi says, racist Americans stigmatize entire Black neighborhoods as places of homicide and mortal violence, but they do not similarly connect white neighborhoods to the disproportionate number of white males who engage in mass shootings. In 1986, during the violent crack epidemic, 3,300 more Americans died from alcohol-related traffic deaths than from homicides. John Robert Lewis, an American statesman and civil rights leader who served in the United States House of Representatives for Georgia from 1987 until his death just last month, declared, "When you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. You have to say something. You have to do something." And Edmund Burke said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Educator Jane Elliott has been fighting racism for 52 years. The day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 5, 1968, Jane Elliott dramatically changed the lesson plan for her third grade class in a small Iowa town. She is now celebrated for her blue eyes, brown eyes exercise. She demonstrates in a powerful way how discrimination can quickly escalate in a situation where one group feels superior to another. Jane Elliott also declares that there is no separation of races, only differentiation due to the amount of pigment in our skin. I am not white. A piece of paper is white. A cotton ball is white. But we are all descended from Black ancestors in what we now call Africa. In the most recent issue of Time magazine, American singer and songwriter Pharrell Williams writes an article about systemic racism and inequality in the USA. This is an excerpt. On April 26, 1607, 3 ships carrying 105 men and boys landed on the eastern shore of what would come to be called America. They called themselves adventurers, but they had no interest in liberty or justice, and they were not seeking religious freedom or escaping from tyranny. They were part of the Virginia Company of London, which was essentially a private equity-funded startup that hoped to turn a profit for the stockholders in Europe's fastest growing international money-making scheme, colonialism. 12 years later, an English ship called the White Lion carried a product that would change everything. America became an economic superpower because that ship's cargo opened up a market more valuable than those settlers would ever imagine. That market was for human beings trafficked from Africa. In a recent statement from former US President Jimmy Carter, he said, "Rosalind and I are pained by the tragic racial injustices and consequent backlash across our nation in recent weeks. As a white male in the South, I know all too well the impact of segregation and injustice to African Americans." Peggy McIntosh is Associate Director of the Wellesley College Center for Research on Women. In an essay discussing white privilege, she states, "I was taught to see racism only in individual acts of meanness, not in invisible systems conferring dominance to my group." She has often noticed men's unwillingness to grant that they are overprivileged, even though those men may grant that women are disadvantaged. She thinks whites are carefully taught not to recognize white privilege, as males are taught not to recognize male privilege. She has come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets that she can count on cashing in each day, but about which she was meant to remain oblivious. She began counting the ways in which she enjoys unearned skin privilege and has been conditioned into oblivion about its existence. Peggy McIntosh suggests working on ourselves by identifying some of the daily effects of white privilege in our lives. Think of conditions that we may attach more to skin color privilege than to class, religion, ethnic status, or geographic location. Although, of course, all these other factors are intricately intertwined. She goes on to say that as far as she can tell, her African-American coworkers, friends, and acquaintances with whom she comes into daily or frequent contact cannot count on most of these conditions. If I should need to move, I can be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area where I can afford and in which I would want to live. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors in such a location will be neutral or pleasant to me. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. When I'm told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. I can be pretty sure of having my voice heard in a group in which I am the only member of my race. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of financial reliability. I can talk with my mouth full and not have people put this down to my color. I can swear or dress in secondhand clothes or not answer letters without having people attribute these choices to the bad morals, the poverty, or the illiteracy of my race. I can do well in a challenging situation without being called a credit to my race. And if a traffic cop pulls me over, or if the IRS audits my tax return, I can be sure I have not been singled out because of my race. During normal times, our church proudly displays a large banner many Sunday mornings on our property. It says, Black Lives Matter. I say Black Lives Matter because all didn't cover Black when they said all men are created equal. I say Black Lives Matter because all didn't cover Black when they said with liberty and justice for all. I say Black Lives Matter because they're struggling with the definition of all. May we all be challenged to act when we witness injustice. May each of us strive to be anti-racist as we honor, obey, and celebrate the principles of our liberal faith.
Okay, thank you, Jim. How to Be an Anti-Racist was such a remarkable book for me. It took a very complex issue and broke it down into different aspects using both historical facts and personal life stories from his childhood to his adulthood, and dealings with racism as he grew up. Also facing his own racism as a Black person, facing, I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up here. He told a story from his childhood through his adulthood and becoming a doctorate. And it was such a, it had pain, but it had happiness too. He faced his own journey towards becoming an anti-racist. It was such a readable book, and I learned so much. I too grew up in a very, very, very white community in a New York City suburb. But fortunately, in my family, I never heard a negative word about anyone based on color, religion, or nationality. My mother told me that her mother sat her and her sisters down and told them that no matter what someone's color or religion or nationality, everyone was the same inside. and God loved them all. This was a very important lesson in the 30s. When I grew older, sometime in the 70s, I used to talk to my father about race problems. He worked in the automotive field and traveled a lot. He lamented that when he was in shops in, say, Brooklyn, Black men were being trained as assistant managers. But in many shops down in the South, they were relegated to being floor sweepers, and that he felt it was such a waste of human talent, and it was so wrong to keep people down. But I was still in a very white world. Though our town was right next door to a town that was predominantly Black, we rarely encountered these neighbors. When I was very little, I asked my father why we never saw Black people at Jones Beach, which was a public beach on the South Shore of Long Island. He said he didn't know. But now I believe it was a part of developer Robert Moses's plan. A Black friend who grew up in the area recently told me she just knew her family was not invited to go there. There were no signs, but they knew. A town not 10 miles from my hometown, Levittown, was developed to be a new, affordable community for World War II veterans to come and settle down and raise their families. But Black veterans didn't count. There were covenants to make sure of that, and the VA enforced those restrictions. I learned a lot in this book. There's no such thing as different races. We're all part of the human race. The idea of separate races of people in this country started roughly in the 1600s. So much has been written over the centuries about proofs and the reasons why white is better, smarter, more cultured. In the late 1600s and early 1700s, much more severe slave codes were established. These laws ensured segregation so that poor white workers and indentured servants and Black slaves would never be allowed to form joint rebellions. The aristocracy in Virginia had to increase the number of slaves and the control over them to maintain and increase their power and wealth. And it went on from there. Stereotypes based on race are alive and well in America today. They are so a part of us that we don't even think about it. One can be racist, non-racist, and anti-racist all at different times. Some people will say, I'm a non-racist, or I'm colorblind, I treat everyone equally. But not to see someone's color is not to see them and not to appreciate the different life experiences in today's America. The opposite of racist policies is not non-racist policies. It is specific anti-racist policies. People need to find a way to demand anti-racist policies and stop the culture of white supremacy. When my reading group finished Professor Kendi's book, we decided to continue to meet and study additional sources so that we could work towards becoming anti-racists. It's very important to be aware of dog whistles. Professor Carol Anderson of Emory University describes this very well in her book, White Rage. She also has many wonderful talks on YouTube. Political dog whistles are terms that sound perfectly okay, perfectly reasonable, but to particular groups, they hear the coded messages. In one of her talks, she talked about government-issued photo IDs for voting. What could possibly be wrong with needing an ID? In 2008, record numbers of people voted, and President Obama won the election. This got noticed. So many people of color voted. Now, since the voting rights has recently been gutted, the states have gone all out to suppress. In Alabama, a public housing ID doesn't count. But then, what do you know? The government shut down all the Department of Motor Vehicles in these mostly Black areas. What do you do when the DMV is 3 counties over and there's no public transportation to get there? In Texas, college IDs don't count, but a concealed weapon permit does. And lo and behold, only 1/3 of counties in Texas have DMVs. So for some people, it would be 125 miles away. So a 250-mile round trip to get an ID. How do you get there? And no KKK march was needed to create these obstacles for voting. It was a governmental decision. And now they can say, Black people just don't get out to vote. I fully recommend listening to Professor Anderson's talks on YouTube. All this madness in our culture today is happening on our watch. Now we see Black victims of law enforcement brutality filmed live via people's cell phone. Being filmed doesn't even stop it. What was going on before these days of modern technology? But still, the blindness continues. There are people in Arizona complaining in the paper about combining sports and politics. I'm going to boycott the NBA. They get paid, they should just play. I recommend reading Greg Moore's articles and opinion pieces in the Arizona Republic to counter this view. It is way past time to learn, to open our eyes and our hearts and demand changes in our government, our justice system, our economy, and the ways we do business. Perhaps we should all be kneeling when they play the national anthem. Can you imagine what America could be if we were what we were supposed to be? I close now with 2 quotes by Desmond Tutu. He is a South African Anglican priest and civil rights activist, and Nelson Mandela appointed him to be the chairperson of their Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Differences are not intended to separate, to alienate. We are different precisely in order to realize our need for one another. And my humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together. So thank you. And thank you, Jim, for working on this project with me. And I hope we can find ways to work together as a congregation and as a community to go forward and beat this thing. Wow. Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate doing this together.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now continue with our mission statement of West Valley UU. This congregation provides a safe place to celebrate diversity, draw inspiration for our lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassionately support each other in our spiritual searches. We now extinguish the chalice with closing words offered by Jim.
Leonard Peltier, born in 1944, is an American indigenous rights activist and a descendant of the Turtle Mountain Chippewa, Lakota, and Dakota tribes. Silence, they say, is the voice of complicity. But silence is impossible. Silence screams. Silence is the message, just as doing nothing is an act. Let who you are ring out and resonate in every word and deed. Yes, become who you are. There's no sidestepping your own being or your own responsibility. What you do is who you are. You are your own comeuppance. You become your own message. You are the message. In the spirit of Crazy Horse.